She showed up at my door, smiled, and then pulled a gun on me. Why? Because I wouldn't join her HOA. Yeah, you heard that right. This woman went full-blown psycho over some imaginary power trip. One second she's talking about my hedges, the next she's threatening my life. This is hands down one of the wildest things I've ever experienced. And if you think HOA drama can't get dangerous, think again. Have you ever dealt with a neighbor who crossed the line? Drop your story in the comments. And if you're into real-life madness like this, hit that like and subscribe. Let's get into it. This all started a couple of years ago when my wife and I finally bought our first home. A cozy little two-story just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. Great neighborhood, great school district, tree-lined streets. It felt like something out of a postcard. And the cherry on top? No HOA. That was a big deal for us. We were very intentional about that. I'd heard way too many horror stories, people getting fined for the color of their front door or the placement of their trash bins. I wasn't about to pay monthly dues just so someone could tell me my grass was too long. We double-checked the deed, the zoning, everything. It was confirmed. This house was not under any HOA jurisdiction. We signed the papers and moved in feeling good. Maybe a little too good. What we didn't know was that the rest of the neighborhood was part of a local HOA. Our house was one of the few that had somehow been excluded when the HOA was formed. Basically, we were the exception on the block, and that didn't sit well with everyone. Enter Cheryl. Blonde, probably mid-50s, always dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting. She came by about a week after we moved in, knocked on the door with a warm, forced smile and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood." Then she handed me a folder and said, "Just need you to sign these to get started with the HOA." I looked down at the paperwork, then back up at her and said, "Oh, no thanks. We're not actually part of the HOA. It's in the deed." The smile twitched, just for a second. Then she said, "Well, most people choose to join anyway. It's better for the community." I told her again, politely, we weren't interested. And that was the moment everything changed. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. But the look in her eyes? It was the look of someone who wasn't used to being told no and had no intention of letting it go. At first, I thought she'd let it go. Sure, she gave off weird vibes, but it's not like she could force us to join the HOA, right? I figured that would be the end of it. A minor annoyance from a neighborhood control freak. But then the passive-aggressive nonsense started. We got a typed note in our mailbox, unsigned, telling us our lawn was falling below community standards. A week later, she left a flyer about voluntary compliance with the HOA's landscaping guidelines taped to our front door. One time, I caught her standing on the sidewalk across the street, just staring at our house with a clipboard in hand. When I stepped outside, she turned and walked off like nothing happened. It would have been funny if it wasn't so weird. I didn't want to escalate things, so I stayed polite, ignored her, smiled when we passed each other on the street, pretended she wasn't documenting my trash can placement like a wildlife researcher tracking bears. Then came the fundraiser. The whole neighborhood hosted this little spring event at the local park. Music, food, all that. My wife and I went, made a small donation, kept to ourselves. And there she was. Cheryl, running the food booth in full HOA warrior mode. I walked up, said thank you as she handed me a plate, just being polite. Apparently that set her off. I didn't know it at the time, but a few days later I found out from another neighbor that she'd been telling people I was mocking her and disrespecting community values. Whatever that means. 2 nights after that, she showed up at my door. I was home alone. My wife and kids were out having dinner with family. I was deep in a work project when the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. It was her. Cheryl. Arms folded, expression flat, purse on her shoulder. I cracked the door open, already uneasy. "Hey, something I can help you with?" she said. I'd rather not shout through the door. "May I come in for just a moment?" I hesitated, but opened the door. Big mistake. She stepped inside, looked around like she was conducting an inspection. Started with some small talk about the weather, then pulled out that cursed clipboard again. "I have a list of things that need correcting. Your porch lights aren't consistent with community aesthetics. The hedge height is uneven. And the way you hang holiday lights, it's chaotic. I cut her off. Cheryl, we've been over this. I'm not in your HOA. You can't tell me what to do with my house. She didn't respond. Just stared at me for a long second. Then, she reached into her purse and pulled out a gun. I froze. She raised it, eyes locked on mine, and said, "You will walk me through this house and let me finish my inspection. If you resist, I will act accordingly." I can't even explain what that moment felt like. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't hear straight, but somehow, I stayed calm. I said, "All right, okay, let's take it slow." I backed toward the hallway. She followed me, clipboard in one hand, gun in the other. Then I made my move. As soon as we passed the bathroom, I lunged inside, slammed the door, locked it, all in one motion, called 911, held the phone up so the operator could hear her yelling through the door. "He's violating HOA standards. He has to be corrected." I gave them my address, told them exactly what was happening, and waited, heart pounding, as she kept banging on the door. I just hoped the cops would get there before she completely lost it. The police showed up in less than 5 minutes. I stayed locked in that bathroom until I heard the knock and a calm voice say, "Sir, this is the police. You're safe." When I stepped out, they had her in cuffs. She was still yelling about community standards and how I was disrupting the order. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so terrifying. They found the weapon in her purse, exactly as I'd described it. Thanks to the 911 call and the dispatcher recording her screaming, it wasn't hard to press charges. She ended up getting hit with trespassing, assault with a deadly weapon, and making criminal threats. And the HOA, they immediately removed her from the board, sent me an official apology. And yes, a literal gift basket. That part almost made me laugh. After that, things changed. A couple of neighbors came by and told me they were glad someone finally stood up to her. Apparently, she'd been harassing people for years. No one else had dared to push back, until now. We installed security cameras just in case. Haven't had a single issue since. The HOA backed off completely, and the board made some changes to make sure something like this never happens again. But I still think about how fast it all escalated, from lawn complaints to a loaded gun, just like that. So let me ask you, have you ever dealt with a neighbor who went way too far? Or an HOA that forgot it's not the government? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And hey, if this blew your mind even a little, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Take care of yourselves, and maybe double check who's running your HOA. Just saying. See you in the next one.